with the chief agent with the BCI. Director Gabrowska has been here, very actively engaged in this investigation over the weekend and leading on through today, but he had to leave the state in a planned out-of-state excursion. But we have a couple of other agents here in the room with us today, and I want to thank them for their work. We'll get to that more on Friday. Moments ago here in City Hall, I was able to meet with Fargo police officer Zach Robinson. And assured Officer Robinson that I have made a complete review in the last days of the evidence, the massive evidence that the BCI and other agencies, federal and state and local, have assembled in this investigation. I've evaluated the videotape from multiple sources of the scene of this event, photographs, evidence, testimonial evidence and information. Late yesterday afternoon, the body cam worn by police officer Zach Robinson during the course of this entire event. I assured Officer Robinson that in evaluating all of that evidence, we kept in mind the circumstances and everything that was taking place a week ago Friday. In the wake of Mohamad Barakat's murderous, unprovoked attack, Officer Zach Robinson's use of deadly force was reasonable, it was necessary, it was justified, and in all ways, it was lawful. Mohamad Barakat engaged in a savage attack. He engaged in unprovoked, completely unprovoked assault by firing a long rifle, 223. I always get that wrong. 223. He unleashed what can only be described fairly as a murderous barrage of fire. But that isn't to say that it wasn't precise. In fact, it was. As we all know, the toll of that assault was 3 officers down, 1 officer deceased, 1 civilian shot as she was trying to flee the gunfire. The assailant, in addition to carrying that .223 caliber long rifle, it's important to note that it was he was utilizing a double-stacked mag, which essentially means in addition to having a large capacity magazine, it had 2 side by side. A total of 60 rounds were capable of being fired from that weapon, and most were. In his initial barrage, before he shot the civilian, he, as we said, and as has been reported, as you're all aware, he struck with multiple rounds Police Officer Dotis, Police Officer Hawes, and he mortally wounded Police Officer Waleen. As I said, Carly Kosowick, who was involved in the car accident, we'll get into the details of this on Friday. This was a car accident unrelated to the assailant, but Carly Kosowick was involved in the accident. She was standing on the sidewalk at the time when the gunfire broke out. She did as anybody would do, started running from the scene. The assailant turned his rifle toward her and hit her with 2 live rounds. At this time, Police Officer Robinson was away from the other officers who were standing 15, maybe 20 feet, the same distance that I am from the front row here. That's how far the officers were from Barakat, who was in his vehicle firing. Officer Robinson wasn't in that parking lot, though. He was out in the road, approximately 75 feet away from Mohamad Barakat. You will eventually, of course, have the body cam footage. You may have seen there's some stuff out there on social media. You'll see the body cam from the officers. We can't release that at this point. It remains a very active investigation. The fire from the weapon, from Barakat's weapon, is rapid fire. You will believe it to be when you hear it, as Officer Robinson reasonably believed it to be, a fully automatic fire. It's that rapid. The Officer Robinson, just happened to be standing behind, as from where the shooter is, he's standing away from, separated by one of the cars that was in the accident, because he was going to move a police vehicle up to ensure that it didn't get struck again after they moved one of the other vehicles out. Everything was very relaxed out there and nonchalant, but he just happened to be standing on the other side of the vehicle from where Barakat now has shot rapid fire. Before you can even think in this situation, you don't know where the shots are coming from. It's not clear at all, except that when you look up, you know exactly where it's coming from. He had the presence of mind to phone in, to radio call in, shots fired, not knowing if he was going to be the next officer struck, and knowing that help had to be called in and had to be on the way. Again and again, in watching through the evidence in this case, you see that presence of mind, the training, the professionalism. These are cliched words, but they are true. And the courage, the absolute courage under fire, displayed by Police Officer Robinson. Incredible. He moved from behind the vehicle that was protecting him and exchanged fire with the assailant. At first, his first shots were from behind the vehicle, but he eventually moved around it. His shooting, even though at a distance, and any of you ever shot a firearm, a handgun, you're outmatched pretty significantly at 75 feet. Someone has a high-powered rifle with a scope on it. Officer Robinson kept his poise, kept his focus, and one of the rounds that he fired at Barakat disabled the long rifle and saved around 20 rounds that would have been still available for the assailant to shoot. He incapacitated it when it still had 20 rounds remaining to shoot. But Barakat wasn't done. As Officer Robinson moved closer in on the defendant, Barakat, who's now on the ground, he's continuing to call in. Only then was he able to even notice and see that he had 3 officers down, which he called in. They were the only 4 officers on the scene. He called in. He said, we have 3 officers down. Send everybody. And send everybody they did. But no one could get on scene before the officer is able to observe the defendant, whose rifle has been incapacitated, has now rearmed himself. He's got a 9mm that he's taken out, and then he's waving around. Officer Robinson gave repeated directives to the assailant. Hands up, put down the gun. I've watched the tape over and over. 16 directives. Put down the gun. The defendant was wounded, but was waving the gun around from his position in the parking lot, protected off from a car, by his car. He persisted. Hands up again. The officer exchanges additional fire. Put your hands up. Drop the gun. Still doesn't drop the gun. Officer Robinson, at danger to himself and his life, knowing that there are more civilians hiding behind the car, just behind where the assailant is, crouched just 5, maybe 6 feet away. Officer Robinson continues to close ground on the assailant, goes around the vehicle, comes around the back, and gives one last command: put down the gun. He does not, and the threat was neutralized by the officer. I'm going to share some photos, not many. These are not ghoulish photos. These are informational photos. I will have them put up on the screen in a moment, and I'll describe. This is the car that was being driven by the assailant. And we'll talk more Friday about the actions that we did see, the movements prior to this incident. But again, he was not involved in the car accident, nor could he have known that it happened. It was a pure fate moment that he happened upon this scene, and all of these officers are out there. He was on the street. He eventually ends up, this is the little parking lot where it was parked. And then there's a little grassway down to the road. And the accident would have been happening just to the left of what you see, where you see the Fargo police vehicle. That's where the accident between the two civilians occurred. The defendant jumped out of the front seat of this car after he shot the officers from inside the car. He absolutely ambushed them from inside that vehicle. They had no way to know. And he accessed one of the many weapons that he had in the vehicle, all of which were loaded. He jumped out and went around. You can also see in that vehicle some of the other contents, which we're going to talk about in detail on Friday. There were explosives in there. There were canisters with gasoline in there. And switch to the next photo, please. There was this homemade hand grenade, which was in fact operable with the fuse out the top. As you see, that was inside the vehicle as well on a vest. He didn't have a bulletproof vest. It was just sort of a, I don't know what you would call it, a shooting vest of some kind. And it had loaded magazines all throughout in every pocket. Switch to the next picture, please. Here's the contents of what the defendant, the assailant, Mohamad Barakat, had inside of his vehicle. I'll save you the counting. There are 1,800 live rounds of .223, which would fit into any one of those weapons, long rifles up in the right hand of that photo. He had those 3 long rifles. He had 4 handguns, including the 9mm that he was waving when the officer was directing him to put down the weapon. And the rest of these were either inside the vehicle. There was a suitcase that had weapons in it that he had rolled out of his apartment just prior to taking the drive that brought him up to where this incident took place. And again, that is not a bulletproof vest. It's just a vest that you could wear, and you keep all of the mags in there, and the rest, I guess, is self-explanatory. Can go to the next picture. Oh, that's right. We just had those 3. Okay, we're going to leave that, but you can leave that up there, I guess. We'll. I'm going to ask the mayor's going to say a few words, as is the chief, and then we'll take some questions along the line. As we said in our announcement today, we're going to be talking just about the officer-involved shooting component of this. Again, having informed Officer Robinson, the full review of these facts and circumstances make it so clear that it was reasonable, it was justified and lawful in every possible way. Thank you, and we'll get to your questions in a moment, Mr. Mayor.
We want to thank Wrigley and the BCI for bringing this report so quickly to us, and we'll have another report on Friday to wrap up a lot of what you have found. It's clear to us that our police officers were ambushed on this attack. It's clear to us with their training and what they've been taught, they did the best reaction. Had Zach not neutralized this shooter, we would have had many more casualties. When you look at the amount of ammunition this shooter had in his car, he was planning on war mayhem in our community. I want to thank our officers and our 2 officers that are in the hospital recovering for their bravery and for standing up for our community. There is no question in my mind, well-trained, did the right thing. Chief Dirksen is here, and if his firemen had not reacted in the speed in which they did to save the 2 that were wounded, we would have lost them as well. It's clear to me this person was out to kill. I want to commend the police force, all the work they've done, the command staff, keeping the focus on our policemen and policewomen that serve us, because this is a real tough one to take. The officers that were speeding to the scene to help out, if I could have got there early, could something else happened? I don't think so. We did the things we had to do. Chief Stabowski has been fantastic in working with the troops, listening to them, talking to them, trying to find out what other things the community can do for that. The new theme in our community is "We Are Fargo PD." And what that means is not only our officers that serve us part of that, but the community is. If you want a safe community, we all are part of this. We all are a part to heal this as well. And this is a time in which we need to grieve our fallen officer, honor him for his service to our community, pray for our 2 officers that are still recovering, and as a team work together to continue to make our community safe and the community we love. And I'll tell you right now, the officers are back on duty, the firemen are back on duty, because they want to serve, and their role, they feel, is to be in the community serving us. Oftentimes you say, take some time off, do some other things. And Chief, you've had that over and over. They say, nope, I want to come back. I want the community to be safe. So I'll let the Chief take a few words as well. And then I think, Drew, we're going to open you up to questions. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Attorney General Wrigley, and really appreciate the expeditious efforts of your office, the Bureau of Criminal Investigation, Mr. Casey, Director Grabowska, all the folks there on the field. They've done tremendous work on this case. A couple things I want to highlight, going off of what the Attorney General said, are the absolute heroic efforts of Officer Zachary Robinson. He was essentially the last person standing between this individual, who was obviously dead set on some pretty horrific acts, targets unknown at this time. And on Friday, when the Attorney General is ready to conclude their investigation, we'll find out a little more about that. But certainly this individual had at his disposal the weaponry and the intent and the commitment to place great carnage upon our community, but for the acts of Zachary Robinson. As far as I'm concerned, all of these cops are heroes. We mourn the loss of Officer Wallin, who was just an excellent kid, committed to the same values and ideals that all of us are. We continue to pray for the recovery of Officer Dotis, Officer Hawes, all heroes in what they did. But Zach Robinson, in a split second, the shots go off, and yes, by God's grace, he wasn't standing with the 3 that were approaching this individual's car, completely unknowing that he was sitting there behind the door with a rifle, ready to start shooting at him. Zach immediately took cover, drew his firearm, got on the air, and engaged this individual from an extensive distance. So I don't know how many of you have gone through training or pistol training. 75 plus feet with a pistol is a pretty good range to be able to hit a target, especially when at the same time you're being fired at by a high-powered rifle. That's just incredible. The fact that he was able to hit this individual and disable that firearm, and he didn't stop there. He moved up. He moved towards the threat as the man continued to come up with firearms, and it was a continued threat. And he knew full well the whole time that until he neutralized this individual, his fellow officers couldn't get that critical medical care that ultimately saved their lives. So not only distance, but time. Probably not a lot of people here have been in a gunfight. Most gunfights in law enforcement last seconds. This gunfight lasted a skosh over 2 minutes. 2 minutes of exchanging gunfire, moving, taking cover, approaching this suspect as he was still armed and firing, and ultimately dispatching him. It's a hell of an effort, and it's an incredible act of valor and heroism. He also shows great restraint in what he does, is at each phase, he gave this individual multiple opportunities to surrender. This suspect was dead set on committing to fire, harm, and shoot people, going from one weapon to the other, refusing to stay down. Left Officer Robinson with no other choice but to ultimately fatally shoot him and stop that threat. Had he not done that, or had Officer Robinson not succeeded in what he was going to do, the likelihood that other people in our community would have been harmed is very high. I just want to point that out for everyone, because not only for Officer Robinson, but for all our folks, a lot of times we talk about uncommon valor. In our department and our profession, that is common valor. That's what every one of our officers has been trained to do, go towards the threat, did exactly as he was trained, while his other colleagues were laying bleeding on the grass. And his quick action, 2 minutes is a long time, that's as quick as he could have ended this. Allowed for that quick life-saving medical attention by our Fargo Fire Department, who did a tremendous job. Jumped right out in an unsafe scene and provided that critical medical care. Got him transported out and in the hospital, continuing to recuperate. We really want to, we honor Jake and his sacrifice, which was tremendous and terrible. I think I just want to encapsulate a little bit about how significant of an action this was. Thank you.
And we're going to wait till you get a microphone back there, and we'll get to all your questions.
All right, this is for Drew Wrigley. Take us through your thought process, the moment that you were told that this had happened here in Fargo, and what was your reaction?
Yeah, I can understand the question. I'm going to answer that on Friday. We'll talk about that stuff. And I only say that because I think that's the better context for this. And I'm glad to go through that to the extent that anybody cares what my thought process was on it. Because, this has been a matter that has really gripped the area. And law enforcement in particular, and law enforcement families. I had the privilege over the weekend to go to the hospital several times. And, you point that out a lot in law enforcement and people in the military too. Every one of these men and women have people who love them, who depend on them, care for them deeply. And every day they go out the door worried that a call like this is going to come. And I met a lot of just amazing people the last several days talking with them. So we'll be talking about, it's their state of what was in their minds and heart that it comes to bear on. And Chief, I didn't see it sitting over there, and I'm glad I got mentioned. We're going to talk about this more Friday. The results of this would have been even worse, much worse, without the Fargo Fire Department. Thank God on so many fronts that things, after this horrible thing, that things fell into place as they did, including people there to care for people who had absolute immediate need. I know you are, and you deserve to be so proud of their reaction to, they're not trained, they're not supposed to be going out there and getting shot at, and they didn't wait around to see if there was another shooter either. They were immediately moving in, and I hope you'll pass that on to them for us. Thanks.
Two questions. One, you mentioned the gun and the modifications. Was everything legally acquired as far as the weapon that he used? And the other question I'd asked is, just from what you showed us today, it's on the screen now, what was in the vehicle, what you described, leads anybody that's reasonable to believe that there was something else planned. What do you believe that was?
That's what we'll talk about on Friday a little bit. We'll have an answer for you on that. I wish I could tell you what was motivating him, what's his why, but it's pretty clear to us as a result of forensic evaluations performed by our BCI, of whom when I was a Fed, you're supposed to make fun of other law enforcement. And I said for my 10 years as U.S. Attorney, just the critical role that the BCI plays, and to be able to work with them so closely as the Attorney General and watch them this weekend working with everyone else is remarkable. They, in a very short period of time, were able to get through some forensics that were seized and some other materials, and we're going to be talking to you about that on Friday. The weapons, though, I will answer that question. To our knowledge at this point, they were all legally purchased. We don't have other information. The investigation continues on. He was not a prohibited person. He did not have convictions that would preclude him from lawfully carrying firearms. And those are matters of interest, I suppose, too. But in there, I should mention, there was a search warrant that we executed on his residence that night and over the weekend, and additional firearms and other materials were seized there.
Describe the mannerisms of Barakat, what was he doing? What was he acting like? What was he shouting back at officers, if anything?
I'm not going to get too far into that, but even when I do talk about that a little bit Friday, there's not much to add about that. He, I've spoken to Zach about that too. He pulled in so nonchalantly. I'll describe his actions more fully because he's on video. We've got video from neighboring businesses and other stuff. We've got, once you know what the vehicle is, now you're going to notice it. It's otherwise unnoteworthy, and you're going to see it, and you see it go around, and he's casing the place up and stalking his way in and sizing up his opportunity, and then parks there and spends minutes watching the officers and waits until they are literally walking, having no reason to not, there's no reason not to, until they're literally walking to where roughly the same distance between myself and Scott Hennon at this point. That's when he lifts his firearm out the window and begins firing. It was an absolute ambush. There's no other way to describe that. The officers had no time, none whatsoever, to possibly get a hand on a weapon, let alone unholster a weapon. It is so rapid, the fire, that when I found out that it is not an automatic weapon, so to speak, I'll discuss that a little bit more on Friday. It'll fool everybody who listens to it, including Officer Robinson, when he gave his statement, what he believed it to be, reasonably. Like I said, 40 rounds he gets off before Officer Robinson so expertly just and poised and taking the time to just squeeze off that round that you hit dead center on him, and it catches the gun and incapacitates it, or there were another 20 very significant rounds coming his way.
Can you confirm if Barakat, was he originally from Syria, and when did he come to Fargo?
I'm going to let the FBI speak to that. They'll be with us on Friday. They can address that question for you.
Are there any rumors about the shooting that you would like to put to rest?
I mean, there are definitely more rumors that I'm aware of, because I found myself looking through Twitter the other night. My eyes were rolling so intensely it didn't seem like it was good for my health. I mean, there's some good ones out there, and I just would caution people. Myself and anyone else up here that I'm looking at, I've never been known to be reluctant to discuss our work. We're paid by the public. The public gets to know what we do, and we've got good records on that. We want to get this information out. We do. The most, the public needed to know right away, was there an ongoing danger to the public? And there wasn't. Very early on, I mean, I'm still driving over from Bismarck this way, and we knew that the threat had been neutralized. And nothing we learned over the weekend was different. And the public can always know. We would absolutely alert the public or whoever needed to know if there's additional dangers. There was a talk about possibly it was friendly fire from one or more of the officers who struck the civilian. That is just not true. And I don't think anybody meant anything by that. Maybe it was just speculation. No, it was Barakat saw her running and moves his rifle over and shoots her in a couple of rounds, catches her with a couple of rounds, and very significant injuries. I've had an opportunity to talk with her a couple of times. I spoke with her parents as well. And they're also, as are the families of the officers, just so deeply appreciative of what they know was extraordinary care. The police actions taken in this case, I would say the same with the investigative actions, are not your regular routine, just, like we build this in. I've stood in a lot of courtrooms. It's funny to me, the number of times you're in courtrooms, it's like people think they sign up for getting punched in the jaw when they're arresting somebody, or sign up for, everybody's fleeing these days. Everybody takes off running in their vehicles or resists arrest. That's not what they sign up for. That's a cultural shift. It's very significant. And so, we want to address those things. It wasn't the officers somehow an errant shot, which can happen in a moment of flurry like this. Not the case. That was another one. I'm trying to think of some reason when I started to read, some reason I had a reason to hide his photograph, and I didn't want anybody to see it, I guess. Not the case. I'm not hiding his photograph. We don't have a photograph of him. We don't have any booking photographs of him because he's never been booked. So we don't have anything to offer to people there. The DOT does have his driver's license photo, which we're not at this point able to release. And it's just in North Dakota law. We'll examine that. If there's a way that we can get this photograph out, as you might imagine, that could help law enforcement efforts potentially, we could maybe get additional information. So we're on that. If I've missed any of the rumors, there are more, but I can assure people that us not discussing it at length the other day, the chief did a wonderful job at the press conference that we had here on Saturday. We've not been talking about what we're talking about here just because things have got to go in the normal course of the investigation. And it still remains active, by the way, but all the law enforcement entities are comfortable with us coming out today to have this discussion because this is an important matter that everyone understands and accepts can easily be resolved with the information we currently have, including video, audio, live testimony.
Two questions here. Phrases like more mayhem and great carnage were just used. Was this just the beginning of a potential mass shooting across the Fargo area with the street fair and the Red River Valley Fair going on?
I won't go any further, but to say, I believe, yes, that it was.
And
I said to Officer Robinson upstairs, it's absolutely true. He was literally the last man standing between what was coming next and what you can see this assailant was armed for. And by the grace of God, he's standing away from where the other officers are when the shooting starts, and he can in a composed fashion order in other law enforcement, emergency, when he says, bring everyone. It really does get me, I gotta tell you. Here he is, he's under fire, he knows we need everyone. And he's talking ambulance, everything, right? He doesn't incapacitate that 223. There's 23 more chances that he's in the position of his brother officers, none of which stops him from standing up and doing exactly what he did, everything he could to neutralize that threat. And if it doesn't happen, it's about a 4 or 5 minute drive to downtown Fargo. And we'll discuss Friday why we had reason to believe we knew where he was headed. And there were a lot of people down here Friday afternoon. And all law enforcement did a heavy response back. I mean, it would have been a catastrophic situation that he would have manufactured, but for the training, expertise, and bravery of a police department. And in the face and name, in this instance, of Officer Robinson standing out there, I can't underscore it enough. I just can't. I've been in and out of law enforcement for a lot of years, since about 1993. I've seen a lot. This stands out quite dramatically.
And my second question, the American flag decals up there on some of the magazine clips, any significance to that?
I don't have an answer for you on that. I don't know.
Can you clarify how many rounds were fired by Officer Robinson? And also, during the 2 minutes that the gunfire was happening, did any other officers arrive on the scene?
Thank you for the questions. I had intended to address both of those. Forgive me for not doing so. Officer Robinson returned fire. He was able to, in a relatively short period of time, but he's able to get off 30 or 31 rounds with his service weapon, a 9mm. He had to change clips in there. So you're starting off not only outgunned through no fault of his own. You don't have your semi-automatic, automatic weapon out there with you when you're doing a car crash, a fender bender. But he wasn't near his vehicle, so he couldn't get to it as the gunfire erupted. So he's outgunned with his 9mm. And also, I don't know what the capacity is in that, Chief. Is it a 20 round capacity in his? I think it's 17. Okay, 17. And he got off one, went through one mag, got into the other one. 30 or 31 rounds were returned. 40 or 41 rounds fired, as I think I did say, by Mohamad Barakat, the 223 rounds, and another almost couple dozen left in the gun because the officer was able to disable it with a round.
I believe that this picture speaks thousands of words as to what, the intent was for the community and for the city of Fargo. My question is, at this time, with the facts that we do have, are we considering this an act of terrorism?
I don't have an answer for you on that. If I did, I'd give it to you. We're looking into all those things, and those are federal statutes with that go to the heart of what is the motivation either of the target that you're going after or what's motivating you to act. And I think that probably the FBI is the best to answer that based on the information that we have.
Hi, 3 just clarifying questions. You said he was in his car when he was firing at the officers initially, or was he was inside?
He was inside the car when he fired at the officers when he struck. And I don't want to don't time into this, the order of them. It was so rapid, but Officer Wallin, who was just this distance away, Officer Haas, and Officer Dottis were all shot while he was inside the vehicle. He began to fire. He shot at I believe he was still in the vehicle when he shot at Carly as she started to flee in the wake of the officers dropping. And when the video is able to be released, and we understand the interest in that, we do. And I don't think it's just prurient. People want to know about what is happening here. It happens so rapidly. They go down very quickly. Like I said, no one had an opportunity to even get to a weapon. And she turned and tried to flee and was shot by him there also. He got up in the midst of his exchanging fire with Officer Robinson. He got up, exited the vehicle, and then kind of ran around the back of his vehicle around the other side so that he had that buffer between himself and Robinson.
Okay.
And there was at least one round. I saw the vehicle on Saturday. There's at least one round that struck the top of the frame, and maybe others were pulled out of there. We may have some more details for you on that on Friday. And then he got to the other side, and that's where Officer Robinson, I listened to the audio of his interview by BCI yesterday, and he literally says, and he actually speaks out loud a couple times on tape too. He's really he's coaching that's not the right word. He's talking himself through this at times too, and he is saying. He said during the interview though that he was thinking, I've got to squeeze off some good ones. I've got to, he just make sure he's extra composed, and he did that. That's an incredible presence of mind in that circumstance, and. I think, I don't know how you'd say he didn't save the situation because he's still completely outgunned. He's only got those number of mags, and that guy still's got at least 20 rounds left in that rifle. It's an incredible act.
And did Barakat ever shoot any rounds from the 9mm that he was waving around?
We do not believe so. No, we don't believe so. He was waving it around and refused to put it down, and the legal circumstances would have there was latitude for Officer Robinson to more rapidly, and be careful how I want to be delicate. He showed incredible restraint at risk to himself in continuing through, as I said, 16 directives. The last one being, after the defendant persisted, he came around, he had no choice but to end the threat, and he did.
Obviously, this is a lot of ammunition and a lot of guns. Is this gonna prompt any conversations or laws about further restricting how much ammunition or what type of guns people can get in North Dakota?
I don't really have any idea what it's gonna prompt along those lines. I don't have an answer for you on that today. I don't know.
One question for Drew, and I don't know if you'd be willing to answer a question, Chief. Drew, how's Officer Robinson doing? You just had a conversation. Any insight you can give to us about how he's doing just mentally and emotionally? And then, Chief, didn't know if you could give us an update on the 2 officers who are still hospitalized today, please.
Well, I'm going to respect his privacy, but I don't think he'd mind me mentioning that. I don't think he's merely being stoic. And that's what I think being stoic would be, just merely and say, I'm just going to decide to shut it off. He's a hell of a nice young man. I'll tell you that much. He's professional. He's smart. I can tell you sharp. And Whether he accepts it or not, he's one of the most courageous. That conduct is some of the most courageous I've ever witnessed. And he seems and is deeply relieved that some lives were able to be saved, and obviously deeply saddened. Well, I'll let the chief talk to that, but he's holding up, I would characterize it as very well, very professional. And I feel like I'm on pretty solid ground saying, isn't questioning for 1 second, did he go into the right line of work? He knows that he did. And he nodded at me when I said, you were the last man standing. You were the last thing between there and what was going to come next. He just nodded. He knows, and humbly accepts that. And is, how is he going to say it? He's marked for life by this, by the negative part of it. And marked for life too is a guy who sought this work, was trained to do this work. And when all the chips were down, where everybody had to depend on him, he delivered big time. Big time. Chief, I didn't mean to talk too much for your guy up there, because that was a nice conversation.
Absolutely. No, you're right on. Zach's a very humble guy, a very competent individual, just a credit to our department, and I think symbolic of the men and women that we have on our department. Very proud of all of them. In terms of our two officers, Andrew and Tyler up at the hospital, still critical, stable condition. I guess I would say moving and, improving, but, we still need those thoughts and prayers for them. They've got some obstacles to overcome, and we're going to continue to monitor that and support their families.
And this is for Wrigley. Final question I have for you, sir, is, you guys have been talking about, the heroic efforts by the officers, by everyone involved in this. But speaking about Officer Robinson, what do you want the state of North Dakota to know about what he has meant to the situation and what he did to save a lot of people?
Yeah, I think that's actually easy. Be worthy. Be worthy of what he did. Be worthy of what all these men and women do. Be worthy. Help them. Help law enforcement. Let's help turn back the culture where it's shifted the last 10 years, the violence towards officers. Let's do our part on that. Let's put in a couple of laws that we need to do. I'll talk about that another day. Be worthy. Be worthy of what they're willing to do. And someday when this video comes out, the video from the body cam, watch it and understand that there are these people who will do these things that we won't, and that we rely on them to do. And as I always say, back the blue, back the blue. Don't just go to their funerals. Don't just show up at the peace officers memorial. Don't just seek their support when you need it. Back the blue. Back the blue. Do things to say our laws are worthy of the work that they do, what they risk doing. We're neutralizing threats. We're putting people away who are violent, who are harmful to our society and to law enforcement. Be worthy of it. Make tough choices. Where necessary, be harsh. They're doing their job. They shouldn't have to face these people so quickly again. And people say, well, that's not what happened in this case. That's right. But you ask, they face this every day. One of the agents standing in the back of this room on Saturday said to me, this is the new normal. I said, I know it. You and I know it, brother. Been talking about it for a long time. Treatment of law enforcement. The vast majority of the public loves our law enforcement. We support our law enforcement. But too many for too long don't. And it's eroding and getting worse. I'm old enough to remember it hasn't always been this way. And violence towards police and towards our communities was dealt with harshly. Reform, yes, we need reform. We're all about reform. We want to battle recidivism, yes, we do all those things. Some people need to be extracted from our communities for long periods of time to protect the public. This isn't a perfect case for that. I'm going to stop on this, but I'm never going to stop on this issue. I ran for Attorney General for this. I've been involved in law enforcement because of this. Be worthy. No one's going to watch this film and not feel a little sense of like your own guilt. Are we even good enough for this? This young man has a young child. He has a wife. He has a young child. He has another baby on the way. He is putting it on the line every day, even when he's out at the scene of a fender bender. Every day. And I just told you before this question, I can tell this about him. He went into this work with a purpose. He's extremely well trained. And he answered the call. Who can know? When the chips are all down, who can really know how you're going to conduct yourself in that moment? He knows. Be worthy of it. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you Friday.